I'm Kelly Durham, and today we're going to talk about how popular culture, in particular motion pictures, can influence national memories and myths. First of all, we'll take a look at the different levels of memory, then how those memories are assembled, and finally we'll analyze several motion pictures from different countries to show how they perpetuate national myths. First, let's take a look at the levels of memory. Memory is rooted in our experiences. Things happen to us, and our recollections of those events become our individual memory. Of course, none of us has individual memories of World War II. Instead, we rely on history. But what is history really? Well, it starts with individual memories, which through social interactions are assembled into a framework of collective memories. We'll talk more about how this happens in a minute. Collective memories then become the basis for national memories. National memories help create order out of chaotic events. They help simplify the story, turning it into something that can be commonly understood, and they help turn the story into a narrative that supports the needs of the state. These needs may be influenced by political, geopolitical, economic, and other factors. National memories then take on the qualities of myth, and by that I mean a story that is widely believed or traditional. We often view myths as fictitious, but that's not necessarily the case. National myths usually are based in fact. So how do we get from individual memories to myths? To collect memories, we rely on people like historians, writers, curators, architects, filmmakers, people who control what we might call the memory-making apparatuses. These are things like textbooks, narrative works of history, war memorials, commemorations, museums, or films. In a free society like ours, practically anyone can participate in collecting memories. Control of the narrative is much different in an authoritarian state, and we'll look at that in a few minutes. Now, one of the assignments that you were tasked with this week was to listen to the oral history of T. Moffett Burris. Burris was a company commander in the 82nd Airborne Division, and he participated in several major campaigns, including Operation Market Garden in Holland in September 1944. In the assigned clip, Burris tells the harrowing story of the assault crossing of the Wall River to seize the Nijmegen Bridge. Burris shares what he experienced, what he saw, heard, and felt. This is an example of individual memory. Of course, hundreds of others participated in this river crossing as well. The author, Cornelius Ryan, collected dozens of their memories and incorporated them into his book, A Bridge Too Far. And this becomes the memory-making apparatus that I mentioned a moment ago. Now, there's another step to this story as well. From Ryan's book, filmmaker Richard Attenborough directed a movie by the same name. Now, rather than watch the entire movie, which is very long, I've asked you to watch one 11-minute segment. This segment is the filmmaker's portrayal of the river crossing described individually by Burris and collectively by Ryan. For those of us who weren't there, for those who haven't read the book, the film version of the event becomes the national memory. It replaces reality. It becomes the myth. The film version simplifies this tragic, heroic, and complex story, making it comprehensible to those of us without firsthand experience. Now, I mentioned that national memories need to serve the state, and that's certainly the case with this example. The bravery of the U.S. paratroopers affirms the prevalent American belief that we were the good guys, that our efforts were selfless and sacrificial in the liberation of Western Europe during World War II. That belief helped lend legitimacy to the United States as a superpower in the post-war period. And our myth is that the United States exercised its superpower in an altruistic way, not only to preserve democracy for us, but for other countries as well. Saving Private Ryan is another example of how American cinema has perpetuated myths about World War II. In a film that's noted for its realistic portrayal of combat, director Steven Spielberg has memorialized what came to be called the Greatest Generation. In the character of Captain John Miller, we see a common man who is called upon to do uncommon things for the greater good. He is what author Lester Friedman calls the Frank Capra vision of the American soldier. Miller is courageous and compassionate, yet he's also a resourceful, disciplined warrior. Private James Ryan also personifies the Greatest Generation's values, when, out of loyalty to his comrades, he refuses to be rescued until after his unit fends off a German counterattack. In Ryan, Spielberg gives us a man worthy of being saved, a stand-in for all of the members of his generation who, the filmmaker suggests, deserve our gratitude. The film, of course, makes no mention of the racial segregation of the armed forces, of the high divorce rates among wartime marriages, black marketeering, or any of the less attractive characteristics of the greatest generation. This myth-making is by no means a solely American phenomenon. The 1981 German film Das Boot is a vivid example of the use of motion pictures to absolve German soldiers, in this case sailors, of complicity in making war. The film represents the crew of a U-boat not as perpetrators of war and violence, but as victims of Nazi ideology. The sailors were generic grunts who fought not in response to some twisted Nazi ideology, but out of loyalty to their shipmates. Das Boot promoted this myth, serving West Germany's needs to strengthen its ties with the United States and Western Europe. Ronald Reagan would later make a controversial visit to the Bitburg Cemetery in Germany, where he said that the German soldiers buried there were victims just as surely as those who perished in the camp. Now, this is an example of a geopolitical factor, like I mentioned earlier. I also mentioned national memory in an authoritarian state and how it is much more rigidly controlled. In the immediate post-war world, Stalin wanted no alternate versions of the Soviet war experience. His objective was to use the victory to validate communist rule as well as his own leadership, so he prohibited the publication of the memoirs of his top commanders, and he banned organized veterans groups. The official narrative that emerged, as seen in films like 1949's The Fall of Berlin, championed the heroic performance of Stalin as the indispensable leader whose wisdom and tenacity saved the nation from fascist invaders. In these scenes, a Soviet soldier asked if the rumors of Stalin's presence at the front are true. His commander answers, "Was there any time when we were fighting without Stalin?" This film was intended to reinforce Stalin's image as the father figure of the Soviet Union. Here's a man who not only commanded its armed forces to victory, but who is so wise that he has the compassion to counsel the young lovers whose romance serves as a subplot to the film. And yet here's another movie that perpetuates the myth, because this film completely ignores some of the more uncomfortable aspects of Soviet wartime history. There's no mention of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, the Soviet invasion of Poland, or the disastrous early days of the war, which resulted in such incredible suffering for the Soviet people. These fairly significant aspects of the Soviet wartime experience are completely ignored. Of course, we're talking about a time when the average citizen had no access to any forms or sources of information apart from what was controlled by the Communist Party state. Memory is dynamic. It changes over time, but even today, Russian President Putin occasionally invokes Stalin as a unifying figure. All right, so today we discussed individual memories, those based on personal experiences, and how these are assembled through a social framework to form collective memories. We also discussed how national memories are then built on this collective foundation, and we noted that national memories serve the state or nation, creating simplicity and order from chaos and complexity. We analyzed how popular culture, particularly film, can help create and perpetuate national myths. Film is a powerful myth-making medium. So for your assignment this week, I would like you to select one World War II movie. It can be from any country, and I want you to analyze it in 250 words to show how it perpetuates and supports that country's national myth. That's it. I'll see you next week.